The rain came down like a curtain of knives, a steady rasp that turned the street into a smear of headlights and shadows. I remember the way the light hit the alley wall, dirty, wet, and trembling, and the sound of my own breath too loud in my ears. I was not a brave man. I was a frightened thing with a gun and a ledger full of bad decisions. That night, the ledger closed on the one page I had sworn I would never write. I had been running for years in the way people run from memory, changing hotels, changing countries, changing the face I showed the world. But the past has a habit of catching you in places you think are safe. I found myself in a cheap room with a window that rattled from the weight of the rain. On the bed across from me lay a photograph with edges worn like an old debt. It was Daniel at 19, hair too long for a student's smile, too big for the family we came from. I picked it up until my thumb smudged his cheek and the room spun. If you want the cold technical truth, it begins with a pistol and a set of orders. If you want the honest truth, it begins with my mother's hands and the way she prayed for things she could not buy. My father left a debt that smelled like blood and owed us breathing room. I went looking for protection and found a machine that traded protection for obedience. We called them Los Zetas. They called their mistakes lessons. Daniel had always been my compass. Where I was bone and street, he was the quiet pulse of a future I could not imagine for myself. He wanted medicine. He wanted to save people. He wanted to walk into a white room and stitch someone's wound and never see the other side of a rifle. The scholarship letter from Monterey felt like a miracle in our broken kitchen. When he ran across the room waving that paper as if we might be lifted by its pages, I let myself believe the lie that the world could be different for us both. But there is a ledger kept in the rooms where men like El Tigre make decisions. It is written in favors, in appointments, in names you will carry like stones. I learned its rules slowly, like the way a man learns to read the language of danger, who to avoid, who to flatter, who to feed. They told me Daniel could be useful. They said a man who heals can also be a tool. The first time they asked me to make a choice for the family, it was not with a shout, but with a polite explanation and a photograph of a dormitory room. When the order came, I was not a monster by nature. I was a man who had already paid with nights of wakefulness, who had already seen too many faces fall into silence. The command to prove loyalty by taking the life of your own blood is not shouted in a warehouse. It is handed to you like a contract you cannot refuse. You are given the address, the time, and the thin, polite voice that says, "You will do this so that others may live." I drove to Monterey with a steering wheel that seemed to weigh 1,000 lies. I parked where the light was weak and walked toward a cafe where Daniel sat reading. He looked up the moment I entered and saw the man he had always trusted. He did not ask why I had come. He only stood and slipped on his jacket like he had somewhere to be. We walked to a narrow alley because the city could not be trusted to witness our conversation. He asked me a question the way people ask about weather. "Are you going to do it?" My hands felt like someone else's. I told him I had no choice. He looked at me the way he had looked at every exam, every lecture, with the quiet patience that had always made me ashamed. He closed his eyes and said, "I forgive you." The shot was less a sound than a punctuation. It finished the sentence I had been writing for years. When it was over, the alley was the same alley. Rain kept falling. I left his body where it fell, but I carried him inside me like contraband. I learned then that loyalty is an instrument shaped by fear, and that the price of being loyal is to lose the very thing you thought you were protecting. I learned that a man can follow orders and still die 1,000 deaths afterward. I learned that there are some windows you cannot close. Nuevo Laredo wasn't just a city, it was a wound that never closed. Even in daylight, the air carried the echo of sirens and the faint tang of gunpowder. Children grew up naming the cartels before they could name the presidents. And mothers like mine learned early that faith didn't fill stomachs. Our house stood at the edge of a dry riverbed, a cracked wall separating us from the rest of the neighborhood. Inside, life was a quiet routine of struggle, my mother waking before dawn to clean offices downtown. Daniel bent over his books under a single bulb, and me, the older son, already restless, already tired of watching her hands tremble over unpaid bills. When my father disappeared, he left behind 3,000 pesos of debt, not much in another world, but in ours, it was enough to get you killed. The men who came to collect wore cheap leather jackets and carried the kind of calm that only comes with violence. They didn't shout. They just smiled as they placed the slip of paper on our table. A name, a number, and a deadline. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He whispered through the darkness, "They'll hurt her, won't they?" I didn't answer, because I knew the answer. By morning, I was out in the street wandering past the broken storefronts until I reached the cantina where people like us went to disappear. That's where I first saw El Chacal. He sat in the corner, the light from the jukebox flickering across his scarred face. He was talking to a cop, or maybe threatening him. It was hard to tell the difference in those days. When his eyes met mine, I froze. He smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. "You look like a kid who's already out of options," he said. I didn't deny it. He ordered 2 beers, pushed one toward me, and spoke like he'd known me all my life. 3,000 pesos. That's nothing. Work for me a few days, and your family sleeps easy. I asked him what kind of work. He laughed. The kind that keeps your mother breathing. That's how it starts, not with greed, not even with anger. It starts with fear dressed up as duty. The next day I was told to deliver an envelope across town. The man I handed it to didn't speak. He only nodded, then pointed at a black car idling nearby. I caught a glimpse of a gun under his coat. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want answers. When I came home that night, Daniel was waiting on the porch. "Where were you?" he asked. "Working," I said. "For who? For us." He didn't believe me, but he wanted it to. He wanted to believe there was still something good in the choices I was making. He wanted to believe the world would reward honesty. But honesty was a luxury. Within weeks, I was running errands that came with cash and silence. The bills stopped piling up. My mother began to smile again, thinking I'd found steady work at a warehouse. She didn't see the bruises. She didn't notice how I flinched when someone knocked at the door. Then, one afternoon, as I carried a message to a mechanic's shop near the border, I saw something I couldn't unsee. 2 men kneeling beside a ditch, hands tied, eyes wide. The third man, calm as if reciting a prayer, raised his pistol and fired twice. The sound was small, almost merciful. The smell of gunpowder lingered longer than the echo. When he turned, I recognized him, El Chacal. He wiped his gun with a rag and said to me, "This is the business, kid. You keep quiet, you stay alive." And I did. That night, I told Daniel everything was fine, but something inside me had already shifted. I'd crossed a line I couldn't see until it was behind me. He looked at me with that steady gaze of his, the one that used to calm me as a boy, and said quietly, "You think you're saving us, but you're feeding the fire." He was right. But by then, it was already too late. Because once you owe the cartel your life, they never stop collecting. The first time they handed me a gun, it felt heavier than it should have, not because of the metal, but because of the silence that came with it. A .38 revolver, cold, and used the kind of weapon that had already told too many stories. El Chacal pressed it into my palm, like a handshake, like a baptism. "Keep it close," he said, "not to look tough, to stay alive." I was 17, my hands shook, but I told myself it was the cold. In Nuevo Laredo, nights had a way of feeling colder when you carried a secret. I tucked the gun into my waistband and tried to ignore the strange comfort it gave me, the illusion of control. My first jobs were still light, as they called them, delivering packages, watching houses, warning when police patrols passed. They paid in cash, always crisp bills that smelled of bleach. Enough to buy food, fix the roof, and make my mother believe our luck had turned. She prayed harder, thinking God had finally answered. Maybe he had just not in the way she imagined. For a while, I thought I could balance both lives. By day, I was the son helping with groceries. By night, I was a shadow in the alleys running errands for men whose names no one dared to say aloud. The lie became routine, a mask that fit too well. But the underworld has a way of noticing those who follow orders without question. Within months, El Chacal began trusting me with more. "You've got the stomach for this," he said once, grinning through the smoke of his cigarette. "And the eyes. The kind that don't blink when things get messy." He was wrong. I blinked a lot. I just learned to do it when nobody was watching. The turning point came one night outside a nightclub near the industrial zone. A man had stolen from the Cartel, a small-time dealer, who thought he could disappear with a bag of cash. El Chacal called me to ride along. "Just watch," he said. "You need to understand how we deal with traitors." We found the man behind the club, trembling against a wall painted with fading ads. He begged. They always do. El Chacal didn't say a word, he just nodded to one of the others. The gunshot echoed off the metal dumpsters, sharp and final. I flinched, but nobody noticed. The world didn't stop. It just went quiet for a heartbeat, and then continued, as if nothing had happened. Afterward, El Chacal handed me a beer and said, "You did good. You kept your mouth shut." That night, I realized silence could be currency. Back home, Daniel was waiting again, pacing in the kitchen. The light flickered above him, and for a moment I saw the boy who used to run barefoot through the yard, the one who dreamed of white coats and hospital corridors. "Tell me the truth," he said. "You're with them, aren't you?" I lied. I told him I was working for a transport company, moving supplies. He stared at me for a long time, then shook his head. "You're changing, brother. I can see it in your eyes." I wanted to tell him the truth, that everything I did was for him, for our mother, for the chance that he could study and never have to kneel before men like El Chacal. But the truth had teeth, and I was already bleeding. Weeks later, El Chacal called me to his truck. "There's someone you need to meet," he said. "A man from Monterrey. He's looking for reliable people." That's how I first heard the name El Tigre. When we arrived at the warehouse, El Tigre was waiting, tall, clean-shaven, his voice steady like a teacher's. "I'm expanding," he said, "and I need soldiers who know the meaning of silence." He looked at me the way a butcher looks at an animal weighing its usefulness. "What's your reason for being here, muchacho?" I hesitated. "Family," I said. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's the only reason that makes sense. But family comes with a price." That night, he told me the rules: obedience, loyalty, and secrecy. Break one, and you don't get a second chance. I walked out of that meeting knowing there was no going back. I wasn't delivering packages anymore. I was part of a machine that didn't know how to stop. Back home, Daniel was studying for his final exams, dreaming of universities and futures. I watched him through the cracked door of his room and thought, one of us will make it out alive. It has to be him. I didn't know then that the same man who had just welcomed me into the organization would one day use Daniel's name as a weapon against me. You don't realize the point of no return until it's already behind you. For me, that moment came the night El Tigre decided I was ready to be baptized. That's what they called it, baptism, as if blood could somehow cleanse instead of stain. He summoned 15 of us to an abandoned ranch outside Monterrey. The road there cut through open fields, dry and silent, except for the hum of insects. I remember thinking how peaceful the world looked from a distance, as if it had no idea what was happening within its own skin. When we arrived, the headlights carved pale arcs through the darkness. A group of men stood waiting by a bonfire. I recognized El Chacal among them, his grin sharper than the knife at his belt. At the center, El Tigre paced slowly, smoking a cigar. The flames painted his face in gold and shadow. "Tonight," he said, "you stop being boys. Tonight, you become brothers of the plaza." He motioned toward a truck parked nearby. Two men dragged something out, someone. A local dealer, hands bound, mouth, gagged eyes wild. His name didn't matter. It never does. What mattered was the lesson. El Tigre looked at us like a teacher inspecting his students. This man sold our product to the enemy. He broke the code. And every codebreaker needs a witness, someone to make sure the message spreads. He pointed at me. "You. Step forward." I froze. My feet didn't feel like mine. The desert wind cut through my shirt, bringing the smell of dust and gasoline. Around me, the others watched, some hungry for violence, some relieved it wasn't them. "Show me," El Tigre said softly, "that you belong." I don't remember deciding. I just remember the sound, the short metallic bark of the pistol, and the way the man's body folded before it hit the ground. The world didn't end. The stars didn't blink. The fire just cracked louder, swallowing the echo. El Tigre clapped once, slow and deliberate. "Now you're one of us." They gave me a patch, a small insignia stitched with the number of our sector, and a new name. Not my own, never again. Names were dangerous. They carried memories, and memories made you weak. That night, I stopped being a son and became a weapon. Afterward, they threw a feast beer, meat women music so loud it tried to drown what we'd just done. The others laughed, slapped my back, called me hermano. I smiled because smiling was easier than shaking. But inside, I felt something break, quiet, permanent. Later, El Chacal found me outside, sitting on the hood of a truck, staring at the horizon. "You did good, muchacho," he said. "You're learning fast." I didn't answer. He leaned closer. "You know what I like about you. You don't pretend to enjoy it. That means you'll last longer." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't going to last at all, but he was already walking away, whistling. When I returned home 2 days later, Daniel was waiting. He looked tired, pale, from studying, still the same stubborn kid who thought the world could be fixed by understanding it. "Where were you?" he asked. "Working," I said again, the same lie that was turning into a habit. He looked at me differently this time, not with suspicion, but with disappointment. "I don't know what you're doing, brother, but every time you walk through that door, it feels like someone else is coming home instead of you." He was right. The person standing in that room wasn't the same boy who used to shield him from street fights. Something darker had taken root, a loyalty built from fear, watered with guilt. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my room, cleaning the pistol they'd given me. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. My hands moved automatically, but my thoughts were a mess of faces, noise, and a single question. I couldn't kill. How much of myself do I have to lose to keep them safe? By dawn, I had my answer. All of it. You never forget the first time you see a man die because of your order. The first one you pull the trigger on might haunt you, but the first you command stays forever, a shadow that doesn't leave even when the lights are off. After the initiation, El Tigre didn't waste time testing me. He already knew what kind of soldier he'd built, one too scared to disobey and too proud to quit. I was assigned to a cell of 15 men, all older, all harder. They called me El Primo, the little brother, a nickname that felt like a joke only I understood. Every morning, we met in a safe house behind an old mechanic shop where the smell of oil mixed with gunpowder. Maps were spread across the table, names circled in red roots, marked like veins on a body we were learning to dissect. Our tasks were simple in theory, brutal in practice. Collect money from shop owners, chase away rivals, move shipments through the border. Cobro de piso, they called it, the tax of fear. If someone refused, we made an example out of them. Fear is faster than bullets. El Tigre used to say, it spreads by itself. The first time I gave the order, I did it because everyone was watching. A small-time mechanic had refused to pay his quota. He said business was slow, that he couldn't afford another peso. The men looked at me, waiting for the call. I nodded, pretending it was just business. They dragged him behind the shop while his teenage son watched from the doorway. I told myself not to look, but I did, and that was the moment something inside me went quiet. When I came home that night, the silence in our house felt heavier than the noise I'd left behind. My mother was humming a hymn in the kitchen, trying to forget the city outside. Daniel sat at the table surrounded by books. He looked up and smiled, tired, genuine, innocent. They accepted me, he said. University of Monterrey. Full scholarship. For a second, everything inside me stopped. He'd done it. The boy who used to patch my scraped knees was going to be a doctor. I should have been happy. But happiness doesn't grow in the soil we lived on. It rots there. Because I already knew what El Tigre had told me the week before. Your brother's smart, he'd said, tapping ash into a tray. Men like him are useful. A doctor on our side saves us a fortune. I tried to reason with him. He's just a kid. El Tigre smiled. So were you. From that day, a new fear nested inside me. It wasn't fear of dying anymore. It was fear of watching Daniel become like me. Every time the phone rang, I expected El Tigre to ask about him again. Every knock on the door made my hands twitch toward the gun. But life in the organization doesn't slow down for personal hell. One night, we were ordered to escort a shipment of weapons through the outskirts of Nuevo Laredo. The convoy moved under cover of rain headlights off engines low. Halfway through an ambush, hit us bursts of automatic fire from the hills. The air lit up with muzzle flashes, and for a moment, the world turned white. I ducked behind a truck and shouted commands, my voice trembling, but loud enough to cut through the chaos. When it was over, 3 of our men were down, and the others looked at me differently, not as a rookie anymore, but as someone who had kept his head while others lost theirs. That's how promotions work in our world. Survive, and you're rewarded. By morning, El Tigre had named me Jefe de Plaza for a small sector near the border. More power, more money, more enemies. I moved my family to a better house, bigger, safer, with real windows and locks that worked. My mother thought the miracle had finally come. She didn't ask where the money came from. Mothers rarely do when the table is full and the bills are paid. Daniel, though, knew. One night before leaving for Monterrey, he said quietly, "I don't know what you've done, brother, but I can't follow you down that road." I wanted to tell him that I'd already walked too far to turn back. Instead, I said, "Then you run as fast as you can. Don't ever look over your shoulder." He hugged me before he left. His hands were steady. Mine weren't. When the door closed behind him, I realized I had just sent my last piece of hope into a world that eats hope alive. And in the stillness that followed, I made a promise I would never keep, that I would protect him from afar, no matter the cost. I didn't know that the man who had given me my first gun had already decided how Daniel's story would end. Power doesn't arrive with ceremony. It slips in quietly like a thief through the back door, and by the time you notice, it's already sitting at your table. That's how it was for me. One morning, I was just another trigger under El Tigre's command. By the next, I was the man others called Jefe. Our sector covered 6 neighborhoods north of Nuevo Laredo, an artery of dirt roads, warehouses, and half-finished houses. We controlled everything that moved through it: fuel drugs, weapons, even people. Every street had eyes, every store a lookout. I didn't have to pull the trigger anymore. I only had to nod. Orders became routine. Fear became policy. At first I told myself it was all strategy, that if I followed El Tigre's rules, I could keep my family safe. Loyalty is insurance, he'd said. Stay loyal, and you'll never have to look over your shoulder. But in our world, loyalty is the knife they hand you before telling you to cut your own throat. My days blurred into smoke and phone calls. I met informants in bars that smelled of bleach, signed off on shipments, collected envelopes stuffed with money. I learned to talk to police chiefs like business partners and to priests like clients. The more I earned, the less I slept. Back home, my mother finally smiled again. The refrigerator was full, the debts gone. She didn't know the price of that peace. Daniel called once a week from Monterey. His voice carried hope like a fragile flame. He spoke about classes, professors, the life he was building, a life untouched by the poison I served. I always told him, keep studying. Don't worry about us. But I was the one who worried because El Tigre hadn't forgotten him. One afternoon, El Tigre called me into his office, a narrow room lined with maps and bullet holes hidden under new paint. He was polishing his pistol, his movements slow and deliberate. "Your brother's doing well," he said without looking up. I froze. "He's out of the business. He's studying medicine." He nodded. "Exactly. That's why he's valuable. Imagine having a doctor who doesn't ask questions, someone we can trust with our wounded." I felt the walls close in. "He won't do it." El Tigre smiled, lighting a cigarette. "He will. Everyone does when family's involved." That night, I sat alone in my truck outside the safe house, staring at the gun on the passenger seat. I could hear Daniel's laughter echoing from a memory years away, the way he used to chase me down the street when we were kids, barefoot, shouting that he'd become a doctor one day. I had promised him he would. And now that promise was becoming a curse. The following months were a study in contradiction. By day, I played the role of commander, holding meetings, managing cash, enforcing El Tigre's law. By night, I became a ghost, haunting my own life. Alcohol dulled the edges, but guilt has its own stamina. You can drown it, but it learns to breathe underwater. Under my command, violence became systematic. We didn't kill out of rage anymore. We killed out of habit. A man who refused to pay a courier, who talked too much, a rival who drove down the wrong street, each became another message written in blood. My men respected me because I never hesitated, but the truth was that hesitation had simply stopped showing up. In early 2011, El Tigre expanded operations into Monterey. He wanted to plant new networks at the university to find students who could smuggle, fix, heal, and blend in. I knew what was coming. I begged him to leave Daniel out of it, even offered to take more territory in exchange. He laughed, smoke curling from his mouth. "You think you can negotiate with fate, muchacho?" A week later, he showed me a photograph Daniel standing outside a campus gate, smiling with his classmates. "He's perfect," El Tigre said. "Polite, intelligent, invisible." That night, I drank until dawn, hoping the liquor would erase the image. But you can't outdrink prophecy. When the order finally came to make contact with Daniel through one of our recruiters, I knew resistance would only make it worse. If he refused, they'd label him a threat. And in our business, threats were removed, not persuaded. I called Daniel. "Whatever happens, keep your head down," I told him. "If someone offers you work, just say yes. Play along." He hesitated. "You're scaring me, brother. I'm just keeping you alive." As I hung up, I realized that I had become the same man who once handed me my first gun, the one who traded innocence for survival. Only this time, the victim was my own blood. Outside, the first light of morning broke over the city painting. Everything in a color that wasn't quite dawn, not dark, not bright, just that gray between guilt and inevitability. And in that dim light, I understood the higher you rise in this world, the closer you stand to the edge. By 2011, I had stopped keeping track of the bodies. The organization had grown into a machine that didn't sleep a creature, that fed on fear and routine. Every morning, I woke up to the same sound, the radio crackling with coded messages, the click of safeties being checked, the rustle of money being counted. That rhythm replaced the sound of my conscience. Inside Los Zetas, there were rules not written in paper, but carved into skin. The first was silence. The second was obedience. The third was survival, though not everyone agreed on what that meant. My men called me El Primo out of habit, but the title commander carried more weight than I ever wanted. I led 20 Sicarios who would kill or die if I told them to. Some did both in the same week. I became fluent in the language of power, short words, calm tone, no hesitation. Fear was the currency that kept the machine running, and I had plenty to spend. Our safe house was a 2-story building on the edge of the city, painted white but stained with smoke. Upstairs we kept our weapons. Downstairs we drank and pretended to be human. Every Friday, El Tigre threw parties loud, extravagant, obscene. Strippers, music, rivers of alcohol, and always in the background, the sound of guns being cleaned. The men laughed louder than they ever would in daylight, as if the noise could drown the ghosts that followed them home. I never joined the laughter. I'd sit in a corner half drunk, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling, thinking about Monterey. About Daniel. He'd stopped calling as often. When he did, his voice was different, lower guarded. I could tell he wasn't sleeping. He never said it, but I knew El Tigre's men had found him. They'd made contact just as planned. They'd told him what they wanted: medical supplies, morphine, discretion. He'd refused at first, of course he had, but no one says no to the organization more than once. He began to send coded messages in his calls. Classes are tough, he'd say, which meant he was being watched. I'm learning a lot about anatomy meant he was treating the wounded. I could hear the tremor in his breathing. My little brother, the boy who once stitched up stray dogs, was now stitching up killers. One night, one of my lieutenants, El Mudo, burst into my office with news. "Command wants your brother's reports," he said. I looked up, pretending not to understand. "He's part of the Monterey network now. They want details: who he meets, what he says, who he talks to at the university." I nodded, hiding the panic in my gut. After El Mudo left, I locked the door and sat in the dark for hours trying to breathe. Every path I could take led to the same place: Daniel caught between two worlds, both ready to kill him. By December, the streets were a war zone. The Gulf Cartel was pushing back, and Los Zetas answered with fire. We burned cars, blocked roads, hung bodies from bridges. Not because it changed anything, but because it reminded people who owned the night. Reporters stopped coming. Fear did the talking. I stopped sleeping altogether. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's hands covered in someone else's blood. I imagined him walking down hospital corridors with his head low, pretending not to see the men guarding the doors. In January 2012, my phone rang. It was El Tigre. "Your brother's doing good work," he said, "but he's being watched by people we don't control. Government, maybe military. Keep your eyes open." That was the moment I knew the trap was closing. The organization never trusted anyone for long, not even family, especially not family. A week later, I received photos, grainy, taken from a distance, of Daniel entering a military clinic. I didn't want to believe what they suggested. I burned the prints in the ashtray, but the images stayed burned into my mind. I drove for hours that night, through the empty highways between Nuevo Laredo and Monterey, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. Every mile felt heavier than the last. I told myself I was going to warn him to get him out to do what an older brother should have done years ago. But when I reached the city, I couldn't find him. His phone was off. The pension where he lived was dark. Only a neighbor said she'd seen him earlier, walking fast, carrying a backpack, face pale as paper. I waited until morning, sitting in my car, the gun resting on my lap. For the first time in years, I prayed not for forgiveness, not even for survival. I prayed that somehow El Tigre was wrong. But deep down, I already knew once the organization begins to doubt you, there's only one way to prove loyalty. And soon, they were going to make me prove mine. When El Tigre called me back to Monterey in March 2012, I already knew what the meeting was about. The drive there felt endless, each mile weighed down by a dread I couldn't shake. The city was alive that night, loud and restless, but inside me everything was quiet. In my pocket, Daniel's last message still glowed on my phone screen. I think they know. I reached the warehouse where it had all begun, the same place where they'd once baptized me with blood and fire. The same smell of diesel and sweat hung in the air. El Tigre was waiting, flanked by 2 armed men. He didn't greet me. He just slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, blurry but unmistakable. Daniel, my brother, walking into a military compound, handing papers to a man in uniform, leaving with a sealed envelope. "Your brother's working with the army," El Tigre said calmly, almost like a teacher correcting a mistake. I shook my head, though I already knew the truth. "He's helping wounded soldiers," I said, that's all. El Tigre smiled without warmth. "You still think the world runs on coincidences? He's feeding them information. They're using him to get to us." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "And I can't have that. But I'm giving you a chance to fix it yourself." He placed a pistol on the table and a slip of paper with an address scrawled across it. "You have 48 hours, he said. "Do it for the organization, or I'll let someone else do it for me. And if that happens, your family will pay for your hesitation." That's how cartels measure loyalty, not in words, but in how much of yourself you're willing to destroy to prove it. I drove all night, the pistol heavy on the passenger seat. I didn't play music. The silence was its own punishment. By dawn, Monterey shimmered under a thin haze, ordinary people walking to work buses, honking children in uniforms crossing the street. Life moved on, ignorant of the death being scheduled within it. I found Daniel at a small cafe near the university, the same one where he used to study in the afternoons. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were clear. When he saw me, he didn't ask questions. He just stood and said, "Let's walk." We moved down a narrow alley behind the cafe, where the morning light couldn't reach. He stopped, turned to me and said quietly, "They sent you, didn't they?" I couldn't speak. He nodded slowly. I knew this day would come. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even afraid. That hurt more than anything. "You have a choice," he said. "You always did." I told him I didn't, that if I didn't pull the trigger, they'd kill our mother, our sisters, everyone. He closed his eyes and said, "Then do it fast." I raised the gun, hands trembling so hard I thought I'd drop it. He looked at me one last time, and I saw everything we had been the laughter, the childhood fights, the dreams. Then he whispered, "I forgive you." The shot echoed off the concrete, sharp and final. The birds scattered from the wires above, and the city kept breathing. I left him there, my knees weak, my soul already gone. When I returned to Nuevo Laredo, El Tigre congratulated me. He poured me a drink, clapped my shoulder, and said, "You did the right thing. Loyalty is what keeps this world turning." I nodded, but I didn't drink. There was nothing left to celebrate. That night, when the others toasted to victory, I went outside and threw up until nothing came out. The sky was a flat gray, and I realized I had killed the only person who had ever believed I could be saved. From then on, El Tigre treated me like a son. He gave me more territory, more men, more power. I became his right hand, the man who could be trusted because he had proven he could bury his own blood. To everyone else, I was a symbol of devotion. To myself, I was a hollow monument to failure. But power never lasts in our world. Rumors spread like infections, stories about El Tigre making deals with government officials, about commanders turning informants, about hidden alliances with the same people we claimed to fight. The organization that once seemed invincible was starting to rot from within. Men who had sworn loyalty began disappearing. Some defected to the Gulf Cartel. Others were found hanging from bridges with cardboard signs pinned to their chests. One night, El Tigre called another meeting at the warehouse. The air was tense. He looked around the room and said, "We have traitors among us. Someone is selling information to the military." His eyes stopped on me for a second too long. "If I find out who it is," he said, "I'll make an example out of him." The irony burned in my throat. I'd killed my brother to prove I wasn't a traitor, and now I was being measured for the same accusation. That night, I realized what Daniel must have felt, that the organization we had both feared and served was nothing more than a shadow pretending to be power. Behind it stood men in suits, politicians and businessmen who never touched a gun but orchestrated every bullet. We were their soldiers, their pawns, their disposable proof that their wars were working. And as I drove home through the dark streets of Nuevo Laredo, the lights flickering across the windshield, I finally understood what Daniel had tried to tell me all along. There are no sides in this war, only survivors and ghosts. But the organization didn't forgive ghosts. Soon it would come for me, too. By the start of 2013, Los Zetas was crumbling under its own weight. The arrests of senior leaders had opened wounds that no one could stitch. Commanders turned on each other. Cells splintered, alliances shifted like sand. The city smelled of smoke and fear again, and the streets whispered a single word: betrayal. I was still in charge of my sector, but control meant nothing anymore. The men who swore loyalty one night might sell your name by morning. Every radio transmission sounded like a countdown. Every phone call could be your last. I tried to convince myself that I still mattered, that the blood I'd spilled had purchased my place at the table. But deep down I knew that my time was ending. When they found El Tigre hanging from a bridge in February, I didn't even flinch. The sign pinned to his chest read, "This is what happens to those who talk." I stared at his picture on the news and felt nothing. Maybe I was already dead too, just waiting for someone to make it official. Without El Tigre, the chain of command shattered. The new bosses didn't trust the old guard, especially those of us who had been close to him. My name was on every list, my loyalty questioned by men who had never fired a bullet. In May, they summoned all sector commanders for a meeting in an abandoned hacienda outside Nuevo Laredo. I arrived with 3 of my men, but the moment I stepped inside, I knew it was a trap. The room smelled of sweat and cheap cigars, and in the center stood El Verdugo, one of the new leaders, broad shoulders, cold eyes, and a smile that could make a priest forget God. "This cabron," he said, pointing at me, "hasn't been the same since his brother died. His head's not in the game. Maybe his loyalty isn't either." I stood there surrounded by men I'd trained, by guns I'd paid for, by ghosts I'd created. "My loyalty has never been in doubt," I said. He smirked. "Then prove it. There's a small group working against us in your sector. Take them out. All of them. I want them erased in a week." I nodded, But when I checked the list, I felt my stomach twist. They weren't rivals or informants. They were families. A shopkeeper, a mechanic, a school teacher, 2 children under 10. Their only crime was refusing to pay the new extortion fees, the kind of people Daniel used to fight for. That night, I sat in the safe house cleaning my gun, as if the ritual could silence my thoughts. The rain outside came down in heavy sheets, blurring the world into streaks of gray. My men waited for orders. They thought I was planning a raid, but I was planning an escape. I realized that if I kept obeying, I'd end up like El Tigre, a message hanging from a bridge. If I ran, I'd be hunted. Either way, death had already chosen me. The only question was how much of my soul I wanted to take with me when I left. At 3 in the morning, I woke my mother. She blinked in confusion as I whispered, "We have to go. Now. Don't ask why." She must have seen something in my eyes because she didn't argue. She packed what she could, old photos, a few clothes, the cross she kept under her pillow. My sisters cried quietly as I loaded them into the car. I left a bag of money behind for the neighbors, hoping it would buy them silence. As we drove toward the border, the road stretched like veins through the darkness. Every headlight behind me looked like a death sentence. My mother sat in the passenger seat, her hands clutched around her rosary. After an hour of silence, she spoke, her voice low and steady. "You killed Daniel, didn't you?" I couldn't lie anymore. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if I didn't, they would have killed you and the girls." She didn't answer for a long time. The only sound was the wipers scraping across the windshield. Then she said, "Did it save us?" I didn't know what to say. Because no, it hadn't saved us. It had only delayed the inevitable. We crossed the border at McAllen using fake documents I'd prepared years earlier. A coyote I once protected smuggled us across for a favor he didn't owe. By dawn, we were in Texas, hidden in a small apartment in Houston. For the first time in years, I thought we might be safe. I even allowed myself to breathe. But safety is an illusion people like me aren't allowed to keep. 3 months later, the phone rang. A voice I didn't recognize said, "We know where you are, traitor, and we know where your family sleeps." Then the line went dead. I didn't panic. I'd expected this call since the moment I crossed the river. That night, I watched my mother sleep on the couch, her hands still wrapped around the rosary. I knew that as long as I stayed, they would never stop hunting her. So, before sunrise, I left a letter and a bundle of cash on the table. I wrote, "This is the only way I can protect you now." I kissed her forehead one last time and walked out. I used the last of my contacts to vanish, new papers, new name, new face. Surgery erased the man I used to be. I fled north, then east, then south again, until the trail disappeared behind me. I became a ghost, moving through airports, hostels, train stations. I told myself I was free. But you can't outrun the dead. They walk faster than you think. By the time I reached South America, I was no one. No country, no family, no history. Just a body that kept moving because it didn't know how to stop. I drank to sleep, and when that stopped working, I drank to remember. And every time I closed my eyes, Daniel was there, his face calm, his voice whispering the same words he said before I pulled the trigger. "I forgive you." But forgiveness isn't freedom. It's a mirror. And every time I looked into it, I saw what I had become: the loyal son, the good soldier, the brother who chose survival over love and ended up with neither. The organization had taken everything from me, but the cruelest part was realizing I had handed it all over willingly. 15 years have passed since the night I left Houston. Time has turned me into a rumor, a name that exists only in the silences of those who once knew me. I've lived in too many countries to remember them all changed faces, passports, accents. I've been a mechanic, a fisherman, a security guard in a warehouse by the sea. Each new life lasted just long enough for the past to find me again. No matter where I went, I carried the same companion, the weight of Daniel's voice in my head. He doesn't haunt me like in the movies. There are no footsteps, no whispers in the dark. He visits in small ways, in the shape of my hands, when I clean a tool, in the tremor of my breath, when I hear a gunshot echo from far away. Sometimes I catch myself talking to him out loud, asking questions that have no answers. I still call him hermano, as if saying the word could make me human again. I once thought running would buy me peace, but peace doesn't exist for men like me. It's not a destination, it's a debt, one that grows every year you fail to pay it. I've seen other exiles like myself, men hiding under false names, pretending to have escaped. We meet in border towns, in bars that never close, trading lies like currency. They all have the same eyes, empty, tired, afraid to sleep, because sleep means remembering. Sometimes I dream of Nuevo Laredo. Not the blood, not the killings, just the smell of my mother's cooking, the sound of Daniel's laughter in the yard. I wake up sweating, my hands clenched around nothing. That's when I understand what hell really is, not fire or punishment, but memory. Hell is knowing you can still feel love for the people you destroyed. I've tried to atone in my own way. Once, in a small village in South America, I spent a year helping rebuild a church roof. No one knew who I was. I didn't take money. I just worked. The priest there said every nail was a prayer, every hammer strike a confession. I didn't tell him that my prayers had stopped working long ago. Still, when the roof was done and the bells rang again, I felt something small, fragile, like forgiveness, pretending to be wind. I thought about sending a letter to my mother, but I never did. I don't know if she's alive. Maybe it's better that she believes I died somewhere along the border. It's easier to grieve a ghost than to forgive a monster. Now, I live near the ocean in a town that doesn't ask questions. The waves sound like the same rain that once fell in Monterey the night Daniel died. I sit by the shore at dusk, watching the tide erase footprints in the sand, and I wonder if that's what forgiveness feels like, just the slow washing away of what once was. People imagine cartels as machines of money and power, but they're really factories of ghosts. We're all disposable parts ground down until there's nothing left but silence. Politicians, businessmen, officers, they were the ones who built the real empire, the invisible one. We were just the proof that it worked. They still sit in their offices smiling for cameras while men like me disappear into the cracks of the earth. So, I tell my story not to justify myself, but to warn whoever listens, the price of blind loyalty isn't death, it's the slow erasure of your soul. The world will tell you that you can serve darkness for a noble reason, that you can dip your hands in blood and still keep your heart clean. Don't believe it. Once you cross certain lines, you don't come back. You survive, but you stop living. If anyone out there is still choosing between family and the organization, between fear and conscience, listen to me. There's always a way out. But every day you wait, that door closes a little more. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're standing over the body of someone you love to realize that you've already buried yourself. I write this not as a plea for redemption, but as a marker for the next lost soul. If you find these words, know that I was once like you, young, desperate, believing I could outsmart fate. I couldn't. No one does. Daniel. Wherever you are, I still ask for your forgiveness every night. I don't know if heaven takes men like me, but if it does, I hope you're there waiting. And if it doesn't, then I'll accept my place beneath it. Looking up, hearing your laughter in the wind, and remembering the one truth you tried to teach me, that no loyalty is worth more than a brother's life. because in the end, the organization didn't destroy me. I did. And I've been living in the echo of that choice ever since.